Marcus had been tracking the elk herd for 3 days through the dense Montana wilderness. His weathered hands gripped the rifle as he crouched behind a fallen log, watching the majestic animals graze in the meadow below. At 52, he had been hunting these mountains for over 30 years. But something felt different about this trip. The October air carried the sharp bite of early winter, and grey clouds gathered overhead, promising snow before nightfall. Marcus checked his watch. 4:30 p.m. He had maybe 2 hours of decent light left, and the nearest road was still 8 miles through rough terrain. As he adjusted his scope, a movement caught his eye. Not the elk. Something smaller, more erratic. Through his binoculars, Marcus spotted a young woman stumbling through the underbrush about 200 yards to his left. She wore only jeans and a thin jacket, completely inadequate for the dropping temperatures. Her dark hair hung in wet strands around her face, and even from this distance, Marcus could see she was in trouble. The elk scattered at her approach, their hooves thundering across the meadow as they disappeared into the thick timber. Marcus lowered his rifle, his hunt forgotten. The woman collapsed near a fallen tree, her shoulders shaking with exhaustion, or cold, maybe both. Marcus had a choice to make. He could continue his hunt, try to find the elk again before dark, and pretend he never saw her. After all, people came into these mountains unprepared all the time. It wasn't his responsibility to rescue every foolish hiker who got in over their head. But as he watched her struggle to stand, something in her desperate movements reminded him of his own daughter, Sarah, who would be about the same age. The woman was clearly lost. Marcus slung his rifle over his shoulder and began making his way down the slope, stepping carefully on the loose rocks and pine needles. As he got closer, he could hear her crying, not the dramatic sobs of someone seeking attention, but the quiet, defeated whimpers of someone who had given up hope. "Hey there," Marcus called out softly, not wanting to startle her. "You okay, miss?" The woman's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear and relief. She couldn't have been more than 25, with delicate features that spoke of city living rather than mountain wilderness. Her lips had a blue tinge, and she was shivering uncontrollably. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've been walking for hours. I can't find my way back to the trail." Marcus approached slowly, keeping his rifle pointed down and his movements non-threatening. "What's your name, miss?" "Emma," she said, wrapping her thin jacket tighter around herself. "Emma Rodriguez. I was camping with friends, but we had a fight and I just started walking. I thought I knew which way to go, but everything looks the same." Marcus nodded, understanding immediately. He'd seen it before. People making emotional decisions in the wilderness, letting anger or hurt cloud their judgment. The mountains didn't care about human drama. They were unforgiving to anyone who underestimated them. "Well, Emma, I'm Marcus. Marcus Thompson. And you're about 8 miles from the nearest road right now." He watched her face fall at this news. "But don't worry, I know these mountains like my own backyard." Emma's relief was visible, but Marcus could see the hypothermia beginning to set in. Her shivering had become more violent, and she was having trouble forming words clearly. They needed shelter, and they needed it soon. "Where were you camping?" Marcus asked, already knowing the answer would complicate things. "Somewhere called Bear Creek Campground," Emma said through chattering teeth. "But I don't think I can make it back tonight. Everything hurts, and I'm so cold." Marcus calculated quickly. Bear Creek was 15 miles south, and with Emma in her current condition, there was no way they could make it before dark. His truck was parked at the Timber Ridge trailhead, 8 miles north, but even that would be pushing it. The first snowflakes began to fall as Marcus made his decision. "Emma, we need to find shelter for the night. Can you walk a little further?" She nodded weakly, and Marcus helped her to her feet. He'd noticed a small hunting cabin about a mile east when he was studying his maps earlier. It was an old structure, probably abandoned, but it would provide protection from the weather. As they began walking, Marcus kept a steady stream of conversation going, knowing that keeping Emma alert and talking was crucial. "So what do you do back in the city?" "I'm a teacher," Emma replied, her steps unsteady. "3rd grade. My friends thought this camping trip would be good for me after my divorce." Marcus understood now. A city teacher, recently divorced, trying to prove something to herself or her friends by venturing into the wilderness. He'd seen similar situations many times, though they didn't always end with someone getting lost. "Teaching's a good profession," Marcus said, supporting her elbow as they navigated a particularly rocky section. "My daughter Sarah is a teacher too, down in Billings, 2nd grade." They walked in comfortable silence for a while. Marcus constantly scanning for landmarks, and Emma focusing all her energy on putting one foot in front of the other. The snow was falling harder now, creating a white curtain that reduced visibility to just a few yards. After what felt like an eternity, Marcus spotted the dark outline of the cabin through the trees. It was smaller than he remembered, maybe 12 by 14 feet, with a stone chimney and a covered porch that sagged slightly to one side, but it had 4 walls and a roof, which was all they needed right now. "There," Marcus pointed. "We can shelter there tonight." Emma looked up at the modest structure with the same expression she might have reserved for a 5-star hotel. "Is it safe?" "We'll find out," Marcus said, helping her up the creaky porch steps. The door was unlocked. Few people bothered with locks in this remote area. Marcus pushed it open and peered inside. The cabin was basic but clean. A single room with a stone fireplace, a simple wooden table and 2 chairs, and a narrow bed frame in one corner. The walls were lined with shelves that held a few basic supplies: candles, matches, some canned goods, and a stack of firewood beside the fireplace. "Looks like someone maintains this place for hunters," Marcus observed, noting the neat arrangement and the fact that everything was dust-free. "We should be comfortable enough." Emma sank into one of the chairs, her entire body sagging with exhaustion and relief. "I can't believe you found me. I thought I was going to die out there." Marcus was already building a fire, his experienced hands arranging kindling and larger pieces of wood in the fireplace. The mountains can be dangerous if you don't respect them, but they can also provide what you need if you know where to look. Within minutes, he had a cheerful fire crackling in the fireplace. The warmth began to fill the small space immediately, and Emma held her hands out toward the flames, color slowly returning to her fingertips. "Better?" Marcus asked, settling into the other chair. Emma nodded, tears of gratitude rolling down her cheeks. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life." Marcus waved away her thanks. Any decent person would have done the same. But even as he said it, Marcus knew that wasn't entirely true. He could have easily continued his hunt, told himself that someone else would find her, or that she would find her own way out. The decision to help had cost him his hunting opportunity and put him in a potentially complicated situation, spending the night alone with a stranger. As the warmth spread through the cabin, Emma began to relax, and Marcus found himself studying her face in the firelight. There was something about her, a vulnerability mixed with an underlying strength, that reminded him not just of his daughter, but of his late wife, Margaret, when they were young. "Tell me about your friends," Marcus said, partly to keep the conversation going and partly because he was genuinely curious about the circumstances that had led to Emma being alone in the wilderness. Emma's face clouded over. "They're not really my friends, I guess. More like acquaintances who felt sorry for the recently divorced woman and thought a camping trip would cheer me up." She stared into the fire as she continued. "We had a fight about, honestly, something stupid. They said I was being too negative, bringing down the mood. They weren't wrong, but it hurt to hear it. So I stormed off like a child, thinking I'd circle around and come back to camp from a different direction. Make them worry a little." Marcus nodded, understanding the impulse even if he didn't agree with the decision. Pride can make us do foolish things sometimes. "Are you married?" Emma asked, deflecting attention from her own mistakes. "Was?" Marcus replied simply. "My wife Margaret passed away 2 years ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry," Emma said, and Marcus could hear the genuine sympathy in her voice. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire dance and listening to the wind pick up outside. The snow was falling steadily now, and Marcus was glad they'd found shelter when they did. "What kind of hunting do you do?" Emma asked eventually. "Elk, mostly. Some deer. I've been coming to these mountains for 30 years, ever since Sarah was little. It was something Margaret and I did together before she got sick." Emma looked surprised. "Your wife hunted?" Marcus smiled at the memory. "Margaret was a better shot than me. She could track game like nobody's business. Said it was because she paid attention to details that men missed." "I've never understood hunting," Emma admitted. "I mean, I understand it intellectually, for food, population control, tradition, but I could never kill an animal myself." "Most people couldn't," Marcus agreed. "It's not about the killing, though. It's about being part of something larger than yourself, understanding your place in the natural world. The meat is just a bonus." As the evening wore on, they shared stories about their lives. Emma talked about her students, the joy she found in watching young minds develop and grow. Marcus spoke about his work as a carpenter, building homes that would shelter families for generations. Neither mentioned the obvious, that they were two strangers alone in a cabin in the wilderness, with very different backgrounds and life experiences. Instead, they found common ground in their love of simple pleasures. Good books, quiet mornings, the satisfaction of honest work. Around 9 o'clock, exhaustion finally caught up with Emma. She'd been fighting sleep for the past hour, her eyelids growing heavy despite her efforts to stay alert. "You should get some rest," Marcus said gently. "Take the bed. I'll keep the fire going." Emma started to protest, but Marcus held up a hand. "I'm used to sleeping rough. Besides, someone needs to tend the fire through the night. And I'm a late sleeper anyway." Gratefully, Emma curled up on the narrow bed, using her jacket as a blanket. Marcus found an old wool blanket in one of the cupboards and draped it over her, tucking it around her shoulders with the gentle care of a father. "Marcus?" Emma's voice was soft, already heavy with approaching sleep. "Yes, thank you. Not just for saving me, but for treating me like a person worth saving." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest, a motion he hadn't experienced since Margaret's illness. Everyone's worth saving, Emma, even when they don't believe it themselves. As Emma drifted off to sleep, Marcus settled back in his chair by the fire, his rifle leaning against the wall nearby. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and snow continued to fall. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, and two strangers rested safely through what could have been a deadly night. Marcus stared into the flames, thinking about the decision he'd made that afternoon. He could have taken his shot at that elk, had meat in his freezer for the winter, and gone home with another successful hunt to add to his collection of memories. Instead, he was spending the night in a drafty cabin with a lost city girl who reminded him of everything he'd loved and lost. As he watched Emma sleep peacefully in the firelight, Marcus realized that perhaps some decisions were more important than others. Perhaps some opportunities were worth more than the ones you gave up to seize them. The fire popped and settled, sending shadows dancing across the cabin walls, and Marcus Thompson settled in to keep watch through the long mountain night, unaware that this single act of kindness would change both their lives in ways neither could imagine. Dawn broke slowly over the Montana wilderness, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Marcus stirred from his chair by the dying fire, his back stiff from the uncomfortable position he'd maintained through the night. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine white world that sparkled in the early morning light. Emma was still sleeping, her breathing steady and peaceful. The color had returned to her face during the night, and she no longer shivered with cold. Marcus quietly added wood to the fire, bringing it back to life without waking her. He stepped outside to assess their situation. About 6 inches of fresh snow covered everything, but the temperature was rising, and he could already hear the steady drip of melting ice from the cabin's eaves. It would be slow going back to civilization, but manageable. Marcus was surprised by his reluctance to wake Emma and begin the journey back to the world. The quiet intimacy of their conversation the night before had awakened something in him that he'd thought died with Margaret. For the first time in 2 years, he'd felt genuinely connected to another person. Emma stirred as he came back inside, blinking in the soft morning light. "Good morning," she said, her voice still thick with sleep. "How are you feeling?" She sat up slowly, testing her body's response. "Much better. Warm and rested. I can't remember the last time I slept so peacefully." Marcus poured water from his canteen into a small pot and set it on the fire. "We should have some hot coffee before we head out. It's about a 3-hour hike to my truck in the snow." Emma nodded, then looked around the cabin with fresh eyes. "This place is amazing. So simple, but it has everything you need." "That's the beauty of mountain living," Marcus agreed, stirring instant coffee into the heating water. "You learn to appreciate what's essential." As they shared the hot coffee and some energy bars from Marcus's pack, Emma seemed different from the frightened, exhausted woman he'd found the day before. There was a calmness about her now, a centeredness that hadn't been there before. "I've been thinking," Emma said, cupping the warm mug in her hands, "about what you said last night, about being part of something larger than yourself." "I think I understand what you meant." Marcus raised an eyebrow, encouraging her to continue. "In the city, everything feels artificial, disconnected. Even teaching, which I love, sometimes feels like I'm just going through motions. But last night, sitting by this fire, talking with you, it felt real in a way nothing has for a long time." They finished their simple breakfast in comfortable silence, neither eager to return to their separate worlds. Finally, Marcus stood and shouldered his pack. "We should get moving while the weather's clear." The hike to Marcus's truck took longer than expected. The snow made the trail treacherous in places, and they had to stop frequently for Emma to rest. But she was a good walker, uncomplaining and determined to keep up despite her inexperience with mountain terrain. Along the way, they continued the conversation they'd begun the night before. Emma told him about her marriage, how it had started with such promise but gradually deteriorated into resentment and silence. Marcus shared memories of Margaret, not the sanitized version he usually offered to well-meaning friends, but the real story of their life together, including the struggles and disagreements that had made their love deeper and stronger. We fought about money, about whether to live, about whether to have more children after Sarah, Marcus said as they navigated a particularly steep section of trail. But we never stopped talking to each other. Even when we were angry, we still found ways to connect. Emma slipped on a patch of ice, and Marcus caught her arm, steadying her. "That's what was missing in my marriage," she said, not immediately pulling away from his touch. We stopped talking. We became strangers living in the same house. When they finally reached Marcus's pickup truck, both felt a strange sadness. The vehicle represented the end of their shared adventure, a return to their separate lives. Marcus loaded his hunting gear while Emma brushed snow off the passenger seat. The drive to Bear Creek Campground took 40 minutes on winding mountain roads. Emma's friends' cars were still there, along with several others that suggested a search party had been organized. As they pulled into the campground, people came running toward the truck. "Emma!" "Thank God!" A blonde woman in expensive outdoor gear rushed to embrace her as she stepped out of the truck. "We were so worried. We called the rangers and they've been searching all night." Emma's reunion with her friends was awkward. She introduced Marcus as the man who'd saved her life, but there was an underlying tension that Marcus recognized immediately. His people didn't understand what Emma had experienced, and they never would. After giving his contact information to the park rangers and declining several offers of payment or reward, Marcus prepared to leave. Emma walked him back to his truck, away from the cluster of concerned friends and relieved officials. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, echoing her words from the night before. "You already have," Marcus replied, "more than you know." They stood there for a moment, both aware that they were about to return to lives that would likely never intersect again. Emma was from Denver, 300 miles away. Marcus lived on a small ranch outside of Helena, where he'd built the life he and Margaret had planned together. "Would you?" Emma started, then stopped, shaking her head. "Never mind. It's silly." "What is it?" "Would you mind if I wrote you a letter sometime? I'd like to know how your hunting season goes. Whether you ever got that elk." Marcus smiled. "I'd like that very much." They exchanged addresses, and Marcus watched as Emma rejoined her friends. As he drove away, he could see her in his rearview mirror, standing apart from the group, watching his truck disappear around the bend. The next few weeks passed slowly for Marcus. He returned to his routine, working on a custom cabinet job for a client in Helena, maintaining his property, preparing for winter. But something had changed. The house felt emptier than before, and his daily routines seemed hollow. 3 weeks after their night in the cabin, Marcus received Emma's first letter. It was written on simple paper in careful handwriting, and it made him smile as soon as he saw it in his mailbox. "Dear Marcus," it began, "I hope this letter finds you well and that your hunting season was successful. I've been thinking about our conversation in the cabin, about finding your place in the natural world. I wanted you to know that our meeting changed something in me." The letter went on to describe how Emma had quit her teaching job in Denver and was looking for a position in a smaller town, somewhere closer to the mountains. She wrote about camping trips she'd taken since their meeting, always with proper gear and preparation, but still seeking that sense of connection she'd felt during their night in the wilderness. Marcus wrote back immediately, sharing news of his successful elk hunt the following week. He'd dedicated it to Margaret's memory and Emma's safety, and describing the early winter weather in Montana. He found himself looking forward to her responses with an anticipation he hadn't felt since Margaret's illness. Their correspondence continued through the winter. Emma wrote about her job search and her growing love of outdoor activities. Marcus shared stories about his carpentry projects and the quiet rhythms of mountain life. Neither mentioned the obvious attraction they'd felt, but it was there between the lines of every letter. In February, Emma wrote to tell him she'd accepted a teaching position in Whitefish, Montana, just 2 hours from Marcus's ranch. She would start in the fall, giving her the summer to find a place to live and adjust to small-town mountain life. Marcus read that letter 3 times before setting it aside. Emma was moving to Montana. She would be close enough to visit to continue the friendship they'd begun in that cabin. The possibility excited and terrified him in equal measure. That night, he called his daughter Sarah in Billings. "Dad, you sound different," Sarah said after they'd exchanged the usual pleasantries. "Happier, somehow." Marcus hesitated, then found himself telling Sarah about Emma, their meeting, their correspondence, her move to Montana. Sarah listened without interrupting, and Marcus could hear the smile in her voice when she finally responded. "Dad, this is wonderful. I was beginning to worry that you'd closed yourself off completely after Mum died. It's not what you think, Sarah. We're just friends. For now, maybe. But Dad, you deserve to be happy again. Mum wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life alone." After hanging up, Marcus sat in his quiet living room, looking at the framed photograph of Margaret on the mantelpiece. She was laughing in the picture, her face radiant with joy after a successful hunt they'd shared early in their marriage. "What do you think, Maggie?" he said aloud, something he did sometimes when the loneliness got too heavy. "Am I being foolish?" The house was silent, except for the ticking of the old clock Margaret had inherited from her grandmother. But in that silence, Marcus felt something he interpreted as blessing, a sense that Margaret would want him to embrace whatever happiness life still had to offer. In April, Emma wrote to say she'd found a small house to rent in Whitefish and would be moving to Montana in May. She wondered, almost shyly, if Marcus might have time to show her some of the local hiking trails that summer, to help her learn the area. Marcus's response was immediate and enthusiastic. He offered to help her move, to introduce her to local merchants and tradespeople, to share his knowledge of the best fishing spots and hiking trails. For the first time since Margaret's death, he found himself planning for a future that included companionship and shared adventures. As spring arrived in Montana, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings, Marcus felt a sense of anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. The decision he'd made that October afternoon, to help a lost stranger instead of pursuing his hunt, had opened a door to possibilities he never could have imagined. He didn't know what would develop between him and Emma, or whether their friendship would grow into something deeper. But he knew that for the first time since losing Margaret, he was looking forward to tomorrow instead of just enduring it. Outside his window, the snow was melting, revealing the green promises of spring beneath. Soon, Emma would arrive in Montana, and they would begin a new chapter of their story together. The hunter's decision had indeed shaped their lives in ways neither of them fully understood yet. Emma arrived in Whitefish on a bright May morning, her small car packed with everything she owned. Marcus had offered to help with the move, and he stood waiting in the driveway of her rental house as she pulled up, looking exactly as she remembered him, solid, reliable, with kind eyes and weathered hands that spoke of a lifetime of honest work. "You made it," he said, smiling as she stepped out of the car. "How was the drive?" "Long but beautiful," Emma replied, looking around at the mountain views that surrounded the small town. "I can't believe I'm actually here." They spent the day moving Emma's belongings into the modest two-bedroom house she'd rented sight unseen, based on photographs and a phone conversation with the landlord. Marcus had brought his truck and several friends from town to help, and Emma was touched by the easy way the mountain community welcomed her. "This is what I missed in the city," Emma told Marcus as they took a break on the porch, watching his friends carry in her last few boxes. "People actually helping each other without expecting anything in return." "Wait until winter," Marcus said with a grin. "Then you'll really understand mountain community. When the roads are iced over and the power's out, neighbors are the difference between comfort and survival." That summer, Marcus became Emma's guide to Montana life. He taught her to fish in the cold, clear streams that wound through the valleys. He showed her the best hiking trails, from easy walks, suitable for her students, to challenging climbs that tested her growing mountain skills. Most importantly, he helped her understand the rhythm of life in a place where seasons dictated the pace of daily activity. Emma threw herself into her new environment with the enthusiasm of someone who'd finally found where she belonged. She learned to split wood, to preserve vegetables from her garden, to read weather patterns in the behavior of clouds and birds. Under Marcus's patient guidance, she became competent with basic outdoor skills that would have seemed impossible during her city years. "You're a natural," Marcus told her one evening in July as they sat beside a campfire at a remote lake. Emma had successfully caught, cleaned, and cooked the trout they'd had for dinner, tasks that would have horrified her 6 months earlier. "I had a good teacher," Emma replied. and something in her tone made Marcus look up from the fire. Their eyes met across the flickering flames, and for a moment, the careful boundaries they'd maintained all summer dissolved. The attraction that had simmered beneath their friendship since that night in the cabin suddenly blazed as openly as the fire between them. Marcus was the first to look away. "Emma, I know," she said softly. "I feel it too." They didn't speak about it that night, but something had shifted between them. The easy companionship they'd shared took on new depth, charged with possibilities neither was quite ready to explore. Emma started her teaching job in August, and Marcus was amazed by the transformation he witnessed. The uncertain, lost woman he'd found in the wilderness had become a confident, radiant person who lit up every room she entered. Her third-grade students adored her, and she quickly became involved in community activities, from organizing school fundraisers to volunteering at the local animal shelter. "She's good for you," Sarah told Marcus during one of her visits that fall. She'd driven up from Billings to meet Emma, and the two women had hit it off immediately. "We're just friends," Marcus protested, but Sarah gave him the same look she'd used to challenge his excuses when she was a teenager. "Dad, I've never seen you this happy since Mum died. And Emma looks at you like you hung the moon." "It's complicated, Sarah." "Why? Because you think you'd be betraying Mum's memory? Because of the age difference? Because she's educated and you think that makes her too good for you?" Marcus was startled by his daughter's perceptiveness. All of those concerns had occurred to him during the long nights when he lay awake thinking about Emma.
"Your mother loved you enough to want you to be happy," Sarah continued gently.
"Emma is a wonderful woman, and she clearly cares about you. What are you waiting for?" The answer came to Marcus on a crisp October morning, almost exactly 1 year after he'd first found Emma lost in the wilderness. He was working in his shop building a dining room table for a client when Emma appeared in the doorway carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing one of his old flannel shirts over her jeans. "Thought you might need a coffee break," she said, settling onto a sawdust-covered stool to watch him work. Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully, enjoying the comfortable silence that had become natural between them. Emma visited his ranch most weekends now, helping with small projects and gradually making herself at home in ways that felt completely natural. "Marcus," Emma said eventually, her voice unusually hesitant. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think about that night in the cabin? I mean, really think about it?" Marcus set down his coffee and looked at her directly. "Every day." "Me too." Emma's hands twisted in her lap. "I keep thinking about the decision you made. You could have kept hunting, gotten your elk, gone home. But you chose to help a stranger instead." "It wasn't really a choice," Marcus said. "Not the way you make it sound. I couldn't have left you there, but you could have. Other people would have. And if you had, we never would have met, never would have become friends. I would have died that night, and you would have gone on with your life unchanged." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. "Where is this leading, Emma?" She stood and crossed to where he sat on his workbench, stopping just close enough that he could smell the faint lavender scent of her shampoo. "I'm in love with you," she said simply. "I have been since that night in the cabin, maybe even since the moment you found me. I know it's complicated. I know there are reasons why it might not work, but I can't pretend anymore that I don't feel this way." Marcus stared at her, his heart hammering in his chest. All the careful walls he'd built around his emotions since Margaret's death came tumbling down at once. "Emma," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You don't have to say anything," she continued quickly. "I just needed you to know. I needed to be honest about what I'm feeling." Marcus stood and took her face gently in his calloused hands. "I love you too," he said. "I've been fighting it for months, telling myself all the reasons why it was impossible. But I love you, Emma Rodriguez. I love your courage, your curiosity, the way you've embraced this life. I love that you make me want to be better than I am." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. All the loneliness and grief he'd carried since Margaret's death seemed to lift away, replaced by a sense of rightness that he hadn't expected to feel again. They were married the following spring in a simple ceremony at the old hunting cabin where they'd first found shelter together. Marcus had tracked down the owner and received permission to use the site, and Emma had insisted on decorating the rustic building with wildflowers and simple white ribbons. Sarah served as Emma's maid of honor, and several of Marcus's hunting friends stood up with him. The guest list was small, mostly local friends and Emma's parents, who had driven up from Denver still bemused by their city daughter's transformation into a mountain woman. "This is where it all started," Emma said to Marcus as they stood together in front of the stone fireplace where they'd shared their first real conversation. "This is where you saved my life." "We saved each other," Marcus corrected, and meant it. Their life together settled into rhythms that honored both their histories and their shared future. Emma continued teaching, becoming beloved by students and parents alike. Marcus expanded his carpentry business, taking on larger projects that showcased his artistic skills alongside his craftsmanship. They hunted together, Emma gradually overcoming her squeamishness about taking game as she came to understand Marcus's philosophy about living as part of the natural world rather than separate from it. They traveled, exploring wilderness areas throughout Montana and neighboring states. They volunteered together at the local search and rescue organization, using their combined skills to help other lost travelers find their way to safety. 5 years after their wedding, Emma gave birth to their son Michael. Marcus was 58, an age when many men were thinking about grandchildren rather than new babies, but he embraced fatherhood again with the same steady dedication he brought to everything else. "He looks like you," Emma said, cradling the infant in the hospital bed as Marcus sat beside them, marveling at the tiny, perfect features of his son. "He has your eyes," Marcus replied, touching the baby's impossibly small hand. "Smart eyes." Curious. As Michael grew, the cabin where Marcus and Emma first met became a regular destination for family camping trips. They would hike there in summer, snowshoe there in winter, always returning to the place where a hunter's simple decision to help a stranger had changed the course of both their lives. "Tell me the story again, Dad," Michael would say when he was old enough to understand, sitting by the fireplace where his parents had first talked through the night. Marcus would tell him about the elk herd, about finding Emma lost and cold in the wilderness, about the choice between continuing his hunt and helping someone in need. Emma would add details he forgot, and Sarah, now a frequent visitor with her own children, would shake her head at the romance of it all. "You realize how unlikely this all was?" Sarah said one evening as they sat on the cabin's porch watching Michael play in the meadow where Marcus had first spotted the elk. "The chances of Dad finding you at exactly the right moment, of you two falling in love, of everything working out so perfectly." Emma looked at Marcus, now in his 60s but still strong and vital, still the steady, dependable man who'd appeared like a guardian angel when she needed him most. "I used to think it was luck," Emma said, "or fate, or destiny, or whatever you want to call it, but now I think it was something simpler and more important than that." "What?" Michael asked, looking up from the wildflowers he was collecting. "It was kindness," Emma said, reaching for Marcus's weathered hand. "Your father made a kind decision, and kindness creates ripples that spread out farther than you can imagine." Marcus squeezed her hand, thinking about all the decisions that had led them to this moment. Emma's impulsive walk into the wilderness, his choice to help instead of hunt, her decision to move to Montana, their mutual courage in admitting their love for each other. As the sun set over the mountains that had brought them together, Marcus reflected on the hunting trip that had changed his life. He'd been looking for elk that day, hoping to fill his freezer with meat for the winter. Instead, he'd found something infinitely more valuable: a second chance at love, a partner who shared his values and dreams, a family that brought meaning to his days. The elk would always be there, patient and wild in their mountain meadows. But the opportunity to save a life, to open his heart to love again, to build a future with someone who understood the beauty and challenge of mountain living, that chance had come only once, in the form of a lost city girl who reminded him that sometimes the most important hunts are the ones where you're not looking for what you find. Looking back, Marcus knew that his decision that October afternoon hadn't just shaped their lives. It had saved them both, Emma from freezing to death in the wilderness, and Marcus from the slow, emotional death of isolation and grief. Together they had built something beautiful from the ashes of their separate sorrows, proving that even in the vast wilderness of life, no one has to face the journey alone.